Hey everybody, Kaz Dennis on here with another Atari VCS video. First off, I want to say thank you for stopping in. Today we'll be looking at emulation on the Atari VCS. Before we get into it, please subscribe and smash that like button. As a small YouTuber, every little bit does help. As a disclaimer, I want to go through a small list of game consoles that we'll be looking at in this video. I do not necessarily consider myself a tech person, and the following video is for people just getting into emulation or experimenting with their Atari VCS. All emulators, aside from ones that I mentioned have not been modified or altered and are being used during a fresh setup. I'd like to take a moment and say that my VCS is not modified in any way, and all test footage will be in real time. I in no way condone piracy or theft and must therefore mention that I will not be discussing where to find ROMs or where to download these emulators. This video is for educational purposes only, so without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Today we'll be looking at numerous consoles, including the GP32, the Nintendo Virtual Boy, the Neo Geo Pocket Color, Sega Pico, Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, Wii, Panasonic 3DO, of course the Atari Jaguar, and more. Emulation can be touch and go, especially if you're not familiar with the communities that support them or the people who develop them. So, some can be as simple as booting it up and playing, and others require a lot of extra work with the settings. I am not technologically inclined as the average computer guy, and therefore have spent the last 2 months testing out these emulators as an amateur to both learn and get a true experience. So please, by all means, leave a comment if you'd like to express your opinion, or if you think I may have missed anything. Moving on to the specs that we are working with today. Currently, my operating system is Windows 10, which is a 64-bit install. The system that I am using is an Atari VCS 800 with stock hardware. RAM consists of 8 GB, and my hard drive that I am using is an ADATA Pro 1 TB. I'll include a link in the description for anyone who would like to buy one. My system is not overclocked, and all settings are factory. First on our list of emulators is the GP32. GP32 is an emulator for the Game Park 32, a Korean exclusive with a small limited library of 32-bit handheld games. Support for the handheld is not all that great, so emulation for the GP32 is very sparse. We are currently looking at GP Fight, an arena-style game. Audio support is non-existent for the GP32 emulator. However, some games are functional enough to play. There is some obvious frame rate drops, and some games are known to crash with ease. This is not subject to the Atari VCS, but rather the emulator itself. Among the list of other consoles that do not emulate well due to low support includes the Philips CDI, M2, and Atari Jaguar. To say that emulation for the Atari Jaguar is not well supported may or may not be subjective to the individual viewing this. The Atari Jaguar is alive and well today, with companies like Reboot, Songbird, Wave 1 Games, and more. Developers have been able to work around the hardware for the Jaguar to make some quality games for new and old collectors. Reboot is a prime example. Here is a copy of Downfall that comes with your download of Virtual Jaguar, which is the emulator we are currently using at this time. Homebrews and 16-bit titles like Bubsy and Double Dragon typically run better than most as opposed to the other 32/64-bit titles found on the Atari Jaguar. For example, harder to emulate games look and sound like this. This is mostly due to the low support for the Virtual Jaguar emulator. I find that legitimate hardware is the best way to go. I know that a lot of Atari VCS fans want to see old school Jaguar titles on the Atari VCS, but this is not the way to go. The game you are currently looking at is iWar. You'll notice that sound is a bit glitchy and textures tend to vanish. Frame rate is not all that smooth, but for anyone familiar with iWar, will know that it is common for the game. But here, controls are delayed and playability is limited the more you explore. Among other notable titles for the Jaguar enthusiast, Tempest 2000 also has issues emulating on the Virtual Jaguar. This is how it is supposed to look and sound. And this is what we have. I decided to test out a second emulator to see if perhaps I can use a different build to emulate Tempest 2000 a little bit better. This is Tempest 2000 on RetroArch, which is using an Atari Jaguar core. Not much has changed. Next up is the Geo Pocket Color. Most handhelds like Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Sega Game Gear, Atari Lynx, WonderSwan, and Supervision, as well as the Megaduck, typically work just fine when emulating on the Atari VCS. The Geo Pocket Color is no exception. Emulation for the Geo Pocket Color is great, frame rate is consistent, sound is optimal, and playability is limitless. Let's take a quick look at a few of these games. Neo Geo is notorious for their fighters, and SNK Gals is a quality title that doesn't get as much love as it deserves. You are currently looking at a Sega exclusive on the Geo Pocket Color. Sonic Pocket Adventures is a great addition, and granted it's not a Genesis game, but if you're after some quality titles from the systems like SNES, NES, Mega Drive, or Master System, then no worries, the Atari VCS can handle them perfectly with ease. Sonic Pocket Adventures attempts to push the hardware for the Geo Pocket Color, and it does it pretty well. Emulation, as far as I can tell, shows no signs of issues. On the list of other titles, you are currently looking at the Sega Pico, a console that's not emulated all that well. However, RetroArch and Pico Drive tend to emulate it just fine. There are some titles that do not operate accordingly because they do require the pin and the pages from the actual cartridges, but some games, like B-Fighter Kabuto, tend to play relatively fine, with some exception. The Nintendo Virtual Boy is a 32-bit console released in 1995 and recalled barely a year into the console's life. All games are seen in red and black only, but some people have managed to change the colors depending on how you emulate the system. The Nintendo Virtual Boy emulator through RetroArch works fine and can support both original titles and homebrew titles as well. When emulating the Nintendo Virtual Boy, I found next to zero issues with playability, frame rate, and sound. Stepping it up a notch, let's move on to the Sega Saturn. Emulation for the Sega Saturn is a bit touch and go no matter which emulator you use. I'll be using RetroArch with the Yabaus core to emulate the following titles. Less hardware-reliant titles like Bust and Move 2 play fine but experience some audio issues, which is expected for most Sega Saturn titles. If a game as simple as Bust and Move works reasonably, then what about a game that deals with parallax scrolling and sprite scaling? Battle Monsters is one of the more notable Mortal Kombat clones with a twist, and responds similarly to Way of the Warrior on the 3DO. Sound is glitchy in some places, but otherwise the game is playable. Unfortunately, when you step up to some more advanced titles like Virtua Fighter, then that is where the problems really begin. As a huge fan of Virtua Fighter, this unfortunately saddens me. Among other fighters on the Sega Saturn, some will not play at all, and others, like Battle Arena Toshinden URA, will load and then crash. to sum up today's video, we've looked at numerous consoles today, and in part 2 we'll take a closer look at emulation for various other consoles. This includes the Tiger Gamecom, the Neo Geo AES, Neo Geo CD, Sega 32X, Sega CD, Panasonic 3DO, Sega Dreamcast, and the Nintendo Wii. What are some consoles you'd like me to test out on the Atari VCS? Leave a comment below. If you've made it this far, please give me a like and subscribe, as every little bit does help. Or if you'd like more of my content, check out the other video game related videos that I've done here. I've been Kaz Danazan, and thank you for watching.